Today we're going to be reading Chapter 8 in Heart and Soul. Chapter 8 is titled... Sorry, I lost my page. Chapter 8 is titled Harlem and the Vote for Women. The quotes for today are, "We return from fighting. We return fighting." W.E.B. Du Bois, scholar, Ph.D. And the second quote for today is, "The right to vote is ours. Have it we must. Use it we will." Elizabeth Cady Stanton, women's suffragist. A suffragist is somebody who's a woman who is looking for the right to vote, because at this point that this chapter is going on, women do not have the right to vote. Women don't actually get the right to vote until 1919. All right, and here is a picture. It kind of makes you wonder what's going to be going on. All right. Now, when they're talking about the war here, the war that they're talking about is World War I. Okay? The summer before the war officially ended was dreadful. It was hot. People were hungry. Streets were crowded because there wasn't enough work or housing. The soldiers were coming home from war, and Southerners kept coming north, adding to the crowds. The combination seemed to make some white folks lose their good minds. Mobs of angry whites stormed into black neighborhoods and grabbed people off the street and beat them to death. All summer long, they were burning black folks' homes and businesses in big cities all over the country to try to scare us away, so not just in the South. But this generation of black folks was different from past generations. Many of our parents and grandparents had often looked for help from good white folks in hard times like these. But this generation had grown up into its own. Many of them had graduated from public schools or black universities like Howard and Tuskegee. Can you see? The glare is pretty bad on that. There you go. Okay, Harlem Couple. So that's the early 1900s. Many of them had graduated from public schools or black universities like Howard and Tuskegee, and education had given them the tools they needed to move forward. We all felt like we were on a mission to uplift the race and do away with that feeling of being less than white folks. This time we looked no further than our front doorstep for help. It was like the souls of black folks all over the North were waking up. So basically they're getting ready to fight for themselves and try to start to take things into their own hands instead of relying on white people to help them. Now, Chicago was something special. We had the strip on South Side where we could go watch a movie, see a show, or have soul food that was so good you wanted to go and slap the cook. That's an interesting phrase. Our Negro League baseball team, the Chicago American Giants, was the best in town, but at that particular time, most of the action was in Harlem and New York City. Folks would come visit from there looking sharp as a tack, honey. They brought with them fancy clothes and the best jazz records. Jazz was a new kind of music where horn players, drummers, and piano players made up beautiful music right on the spot. The music would swing and sway back and forth, making us dizzy with the sound of Jelly Roll Morton, Ella Fitzgerald, Duke Ellington. Oh, they just put a spell on us. Jazz music took over the country. More jazz records sold than any other kind of music, and all the folks couldn't get enough of it. Everyone seemed to want to learn to play an instrument and be in a jazz band. On the weekend, we would paint the town red, honey, dancing all night at the Savoy in Chicago, wearing holes in the floor. Folks talked about Josephine Baker, who danced in the Cotton Club and became a big star in Europe, and artists Aaron Douglas and Archibald Motley, who painted big pictures of black folks, strong and proud, just the way we'd like to see ourselves. We read black writers from Harlem like Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and James Weldon Johnson, who told our stories with beauty and style. For the first time ever, black folks were in the limelight, and the whole world was watching. The new Negroes, as author Alan Locke called us, had arrived, and we were beautiful. Black folks were busy as a swarm of honeybees uptown in Harlem, and downtown was a buzz too. You like that term, a buzz? Like bees are really busy. So when you're a buzz, you're busy like bees. Women had decided to step out of the kitchen to get the vote and were marching up and down the streets of New York City and Washington, D.C. trying to get it. Since America was founded, women never had any say about, I'll come back to that picture in a minute. Women never had any say about what happened outside the home. We were expected to marry, have children, keep house, and obey our husbands. In fact, at that time, women really weren't much more than property, barely a step above being a slave. Imagine that. We were not allowed to own property if we married, not allowed to attend college, not allowed any respectable career outside of teaching or nursing, and of course, we were not allowed to vote. Imagine that, right? Not allowed to own property once you were married. Everything you had belonged to your husband if you were a woman. Not a lot of opportunities or education open to you. Better than being enslaved, but not better than being treated equally. Half of the people in America were women, and yet we weren't allowed to say about how the country was being run. It was very much a man's world, and we were tired of it. Women had begun fighting to get the vote since before the Civil War. Over tea and biscuits and at church rallies, old ladies and young women, black and white, wrote passionate letters to politicians and published articles in newspapers, pleading their cause for the vote. They even wrote a Declaration of Rights in sentiments that read, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal." So that goes back to the Declaration of Independence that Thomas Jefferson wrote during the time of the Revolution, which you're also studying now, when he said all men are created equal. Well, they said all men and women are created equal. Women had begun, In the spring of 1912, women took to Washington, D.C. and New York City streets and marched for our right to vote. Black women like Ida B. Wells marched with them the following year, even though white women didn't want us there and made us march in the back. And the men, they tried their best to stop the march. Crowds of them gathered along the sidewalk, yelling things like, "Go back to the kitchen," and throwing trash at us. It was really something to see all of those boys treat us that way, especially since it was we, black women, who had raised so many of them. We had raised many of their parents and grandparents too. Honey, it broke our hearts, but we just walked right past them. We were not going to go back into the kitchen. Instead, on the second day of November, 1920, we marched our legs right into the voting booth because we finally won the right to vote. Well, it was really only Northern women who got the vote. The law allowed Southern women to vote, but the truth was that Southern men made it hard for women to exercise the right at the polls. So imagine that. Just like black men had the right to vote before that, but they would find ways to keep them from voting. They did the same thing with women once women got the right to vote. Our progress was right in step with what was happening up north. People were happy because they were working and making a little money, and there were plenty of new things to buy, like automobiles and telephones. It seemed like the good times would go on forever, but there was a big storm coming, honey, and soon people everywhere would be in serious trouble. I'm going to go back to that picture. And it's a picture of a jazz band, and it doesn't say who if this is anybody in particular. All right, that's all for chapter 8.